Hello everybody, this opening is going to be the Budapest Gambit that we'll be looking at in this video, and this is an opening I have played for quite a while now. I actually played it and did quite well with it at the British Championships last year, and it's very double-edged in that black gives up some material to gain an initiative. So it may be very good for those of you who are rather tactically minded and don't like playing defensively and playing dull, solid, boring positions. So it starts when white plays d4 or c4, knight f6, and if white now brings up the other pawn, so he has two pawns on c4 and d4, black can sacrifice going into the Budapest. e5, and this is a position where white kind of has to accept the gambit. If e3, black can just swap off and has good play. And d5 is, I've seen d5 played quite a lot over the board, but I think it's terrible. Bishop c5, and black has a very good game already. Black's ahead in development easily, and white can't really cause any big problems. Just to show a few moves onwards, perhaps knight c3, d6, not e4, otherwise f2 becomes very weak, but e3 can be played by white, castles, and again black doesn't have any trouble. The bishop on c1 is going to have a hard time getting into the game for a little while, and black's light squared bishop can come to f5 or g4, and it doesn't really matter if it gets pushed back to g6. And the black knight on b8 can either come to d7, or black can play a5 and knight a6, trying to influence the queen side. So this is very good for black. But the main critical line is, of course, white capturing the pawn. And knight e4 is playable, it's a variation, but the main line Budapest, and by far the most popular, is knight g4. White now defends. There are more than one. There is more than one way of defending. I'll go over some other options in another video because there's so many different lines. But the two we're going to look at for this video are knight f3, and black has one response which I don't play, but I'll show you the game. Bishop c5, e3 needs to be played, knight c6, knight c3. Black doesn't need to take yet, he can just complete development. a3. Sometimes the move order is a little different, but this kind of position always results. a5 is needed to stop white having a crushing space advantage. b3, so the bishop on c1 is going to go to b2 and fin queso. Rook e8, bishop b2, and now rook a6 is played because black isn't really going to be able to use any other semi-open e-file, any other semi-open files. The only one he has is the e-file. So the idea here is to do a rook lift and put it over on the king side. So after bishop e2, finally black can take, castles, and black can now exchange a little to free up some space with knight takes check, bishop takes, knight e5. White usually wanted to keep the two bishops because of the potential endgame advantages. And now before black releases the c8 bishop with d6, he or she will swing the rook over to the king side. So I'll leave the position here. There are several more moves of theory that are considered, but it's generally seen that white might be very slightly better, but it's a very double-edged game, and black certainly has has a lot of chances in this opening. So this isn't a line that isn't for the faint of heart. Anyway, this is the position I avoid as black. I don't really like it, but that's not to say it's bad, it's just a personal preference. Now, the other way of defending does transpose. It's bishop f4, but after the move I play is knight c6 and then bishop f4, so it transposes. And here, bishop c5 isn't as effective because e3 will be perfectly safe and white's bishop is outside of the pawn chain. So bishop b4 check, and again the opening splits here. Bishop d2 or knight fd2 aren't seen as good, and of course queen d2 is just lost. So the b1 knight can move to 2 squares. Each one of them is perfectly fine. We'll have a look at knight d2, bd2 because it's slightly less common and it's not as sharp and sort of very challenging. It's not as challenging as knight bd2 for black, because black can keep the pawn, can regain the pawn with queen e7, and a3 isn't seen as being that good because knight g takes e5 is playable here. Can you see what's wrong with a takes b4? Yeah, it's rather embarrassing. Knight d3 mate. So here, knight takes e5 is okay, knight takes e5, and white is doing not that great here. Maybe a tiny bit better, but I would argue black is level actually. Bishop takes e5, bishop takes d2, we don't want to drop a piece, queen takes, and this is seen as totally level, and I agree. The opening books just say black is even here. So that wouldn't be played by white unless they wanted to draw, which you should be fairly happy with as black, and it's not just a dead draw. There's still some play if you want to play on as black. It's perfectly good to be level at by about move 15. The other line is e3, bishop d6, bishop e2, castles or knight g6. And this also is okay for white and black. It's perfectly fine. Again, black's queen looks a little awkward, and even though white's developed, he can't actually do anything really to take advantage of black's lack of development. Black can just catch up quickly. So the other line, instead of a3, white can play e3, because as you saw, a3 doesn't really accomplish much. So e3, knight takes again, bishop e2, takes, and then castle. So again, this is an interesting position, and for a long time it was thought that black is actually a bit worse, because white could play knight b3 and then a3, and it's practically trapping black's bishop. So black used to play bishop takes knight, queen takes, and then partly due to development and also white having the 2 bishops, white was seen to be a little better here, especially in the endgame. But what was discovered was knight g6. And can you see what's wrong with bishop takes c7, winning a pawn? Yeah, black would play d6, and that traps the bishop on c7. So instead, the bishop drops back. Black can now exchange bishops rather than giving white the 2 bishops and exchanging on d2. He can play bishop d6, and again, the most critical line is just white exchanging, and black would hate to have doubled isolated pawns in the center, so queen takes, queen c2. And I actually had a game that followed this exact line, and I found it amusing. I didn't know I was playing book theory, you know, perfectly okay. I thought my queen had moved to e7, and it's just come to d6. I moved it back to e7, c5 to try and gain space, and I played d6. C takes, queen takes. So I've gone queen from d8 to e7 to d6 to e7 to d6. Rook f d1. Queen back to e7. Rook a c1, c6. And here the main line is knight c4 and bishop e6. So black is more or less caught up in development. The rooks are a little better for white, but again, white can't really exploit black's lack of development here. But again, it's seen as a tiny bit better for white, but I'm not sure I buy that. I think black is practically equalized here. So this is a good position to reach for black at about move, I think this is move 18. Someone will correct me, I'm sure, but before move 20 anyway. Black has basically equalised and has got a decent game here. Going back, we'll now look at the most critical line, which is instead of knight bd2, knight c3. This is main line, and black here should really take the opportunity to double white's pawns, doubled isolated pawns, and 3 pawn islands for white, whereas black just has 2 pawn islands and no double pawns at all. Very good structure. But on the plus side, white is a pawn up. Queen e7, queen d5. And now what white is going to do is play h3, and black's g4 knight would be forced to h6. That'd be very unpleasant. So he bites the bullet and exchanges pawns on f6. Knight takes. And after knight takes f6, the queen does have to move, so it almost always goes to d3, which is a perfectly good move. And now the c7 pawn is being attacked by white, so d6 is sensible. And here, I don't really like g3 for white. I'm not sure it's that good. Others disagree with me because they play it, but I always think that the e2 pawn is a little bit weak. So I play e3. I would play e3 if I had the white side of this position, and it's a perfectly sound opening line. I'm not deviating and playing a crazy untested sideline here. Castles, bishop e2. And then black could maneuver a little to improve his pieces with knight e4. And the idea is to blockade the doubled isolated pawns by putting the knight on c5. Castles, knight c5, queen d2, and here black may not be level, but black certainly has good compensation for the pawn. So bishop f5 or bishop g4, sometimes bishop e6, they're all perfectly playable here. I have seen bishop d7 as well, so just move the bishop, basically. And here black has chances, I would say. I don't mind being black in this position. So I hope you got something from this video. I hope you try out the Budapest Gambit. I think it's worth it. You might get some good results, some very nice wins. And comment, like, or subscribe, or all 3 if you're feeling generous. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.